Hi, I'm Tim.
I'm Corinne.
I found the ass end. I'm Chris.
Sarah.
And today we're walking without rhythm, but still attracting the worm as we discuss the 1990 creature feature, Tremors.
Perfection. A scorched outpost in the middle of nowhere.
You know how close I am to leaving this place right now? How close?
Maybe that's why Val and Earl decided to leave town. They just picked the wrong day to do it.
You guys better get the hell out of here. There's a killer on the loose.
Who could be doing it?
Is that a snake?
That's how they get you. They're under the ground.
You see, they're headed right for us.
No Richter scale can measure it.
They're coming!
No scientist can explain it.
Run, run!
Now, this valley is just one long smorgasbord.
Now, it's up to Val and Earl to save the world.
That's one big mother.
Who died and made you Einstein?
Kevin Bacon, Fred Ward, Tremors.
Ne'er-do-well handyman Val and Earl have had it with the tiny desert town of Perfection, Nevada, and are moving on to greener pastures when they find their plans dashed by a series of strange deaths throughout the nearby valley. With the aid of seismologist Rhonda, they discover the incidents are attacks by a species of giant subterranean worms that track their prey based on vibrations and pull their victims underground. With the creatures headed for Perfection and its defenseless residents, the trio form a plan to lead the townspeople to the safety of the nearby mountains. As per usual, we'll be discussing Tremors in detail, so if you haven't seen the movie and want to remain unspoiled, we recommend you watch the film before listening to the rest of this episode. So what's everybody's history with this movie?
I remember seeing the trailers for this with my brother on TV and before other movies. When this came out, I was 6. Right around the time period, 4 or 5 years old, when I saw Jaws and things like that for the first time. So my family was getting me really into the horror and the classic movies. And this one, when I first saw this one, we rented it. I remember walking up the hill to Atlas Video, which is now a hairdresser. And we come home with this movie, and me and my brother are so excited. And I don't think I got that it was meant to be funny when I was 6 years old, because it horrified the shit out of me. I was terrified of this movie. This, for a good couple of years, was one of the scarier movies I had seen. And
But
that was kind of my
Jaws
history
at
with it.
3 didn't scare you?
No.
Sarah?
I don't remember the year I watched it, but I only watched it because Reba McEntire was in it, and I'm a huge Reba fan. And it's turned into one of my favorite movies of all time, and I absolutely love it.
I remember seeing it on what was a really big movie day because we went to see Arachnophobia and then came home and got this on Warner Home Theater pay-per-view. Remember that, when that was still around?
When you had to wait for it to come on at 12:06 p.m. in the afternoon.
you had to,
You
like,
got the
call in
first
order.
few minutes for free.
Yeah.
You had to call on the phone to
Yeah,
order
you had to
it.
dial the phone and put in all the little beeps and everything. So anyway, that was the first place I saw it, and absolutely loved it. I mean, it's kind of a throwback to the old 1950s monster movies that I grew up on. It's just a little bit gorier, funnier version of that. Loved it ever since. So, Corinne, this is your first time seeing it. What do you think?
It was fun. I don't feel like I have a lot to say about it. There were parts that were funny, but for the most part, I've seen this type of film so many times, grabbers and monsters and Slither. Yeah, so I've seen this monster horror comedy so many times I wasn't very impressed. And this was probably the original of this type.
It was one of the first, I think, to really mix the two together in that particular way, which is one of the reasons why when Universal put out, they didn't really know exactly how to sell it.
So it might not have been a good idea to have seen. I should have remained ignorant.
Let's get into a bit of basic info about the movie. It was released by Universal on January 19th, 1990, where it opened against the crime thriller Everybody Wins and the action movie Streets. Filmed for a budget of $11 million, it grossed just around $16 million in its theatrical run, so made a profit, but not a huge one. But once it was released on video, it ended up grossing a heck of a lot more than it did in the movies. It eventually went up to $49 million just based on the video rentals. So that's where it really found its audience and kind of became a cult movie. All right, let's talk about the cast. First of all, of course, is Kevin Bacon as Valentine McKee.
I always forget that it's Kevin Bacon because he's so young, and Kevin Bacon loses himself in every role, but it feels like they put that guy in damn near anything.
Being as young as I was when this came out, I didn't have the Kevin Bacon aftershocks of the 80s that a lot of people maybe seeing this did, so this was kind of really my first exposure to him, and so kind of go back and see some of the things he was known more for, and after seeing something like Tremors.
And it's weird because this came after his career was kind of on a downward slope for a while after Footloose. I mean, he had a bunch of movies like Criminal Law, Quicksilver, She's Having a Baby that he was the headliner for that didn't do very well. So he kind of took this one somewhat out of desperation. He said in an interview that He actually at one point collapsed on the ground in front of his wife saying, "I'm going to be in a movie about giant underground worms," moaning that his career was going nowhere. And yet this one was one of his more successful at the time in the end. And he's kind of come around to the point where just last year he was talking about if they do another one, he wants to be in on it. He actually wants to come back and do another Tremors movie as that character. I like how they kind of set up Val as something of the dreamer. He's the one who feels like they're not really living up to their potential and wants something more.
He still has youthful dreams, and you can see a lot of the other two children, they kind of have the same sort of disdain for where they are. As you get older, all of the older characters, they're kind of settled in, and you get to the point where, like, the Reba character and her husband, they want to be there. They plan
they've
to be
come
there.
there.
So I think a lot of that is his youth.
And you also see that reflected in his view of what the perfect woman is. This woman that he dated one time, and then everybody has to conform to this checklist.
You will have long blonde hair, big green eyes, world-class breasts, ass that won't quit, and legs that go all the way up.
See, did he date her before? Because I honestly thought when I saw that it was pictures of a porn star, which is basically what he described.
A lot of them look like Polaroids, so it might be somebody he had a crush on at some point or something.
Yeah.
But
You know, they almost have that sort of, here is what's wrong with my life kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And I almost get the idea that Bacon may have not necessarily been from perfection.
For a character whose name is Valentine, his whole arc is about how his ideal woman transforms from this ideal perfection to a real woman who has an education and thoughts of her own. So his arc is really a love story.
and also having somewhat more realistic expectations.
Yeah.
Right.
Or at least not realizing what he really wanted. I just realized in this one, it goes even down to the costume design where his belt buckle
belt,
with the Val
yes, I was
is a
gonna
heart
mention
shape.
that.
That's
Yeah.
a really
I
nice
never
touch.
noticed that.
And
Yeah.
You don't realize that. I mean, the production value, they'd put that much time into clever little things like that it's like you're writing a movie about worms under the ground, dude. You know, but it shines through in a lot of it. But an interesting thing about Val and the girl is he's the first one to go, it's a girl from university. Whenever you're in a small town and you say from university, that means it's close by. Which means that it's almost like this is what I don't have. So automatically she better be attractive or shun, you know what I mean? I don't want to be around these people. It's like a university town small cop. Oh, I wanted to go to the school, but now I'd rather police these kids around, you know, kind of thing. And they never full out do that with his character, but you kind of get that kind of mentality about it, you know, where I'm past this, but I'm still romanticizing it.
And there's also a little implication, especially in that last scene, that maybe part of his apparent disdain for her is also the fact that he doesn't feel good enough.
Right,
That
of
he
course.
sees her as this, like you said, this college woman moving on to a PhD, moving on to bigger and better things, while he's this handyman stuck in this town. Why would she ever be interested in him?
The theme of romance and the character of Valentine and the hearts is that he is set up to be the heartthrob. And this movie does a really great job of setting up archetypes and then having every single character follow that archetype stereotypically, but under the surface enough that it's not in your face.
Let's move on to Fred Ward playing Earl Bassett. Ward's a fantastic character actor. You've also probably seen him in The Right Stuff, Raymond Williams' The Adventure Begins, Miami Blues, Henry and June, The Player, and most recently he was on True Detective. He gives it this sort of self-satisfied blue-collar quality. He feels like the kind of guy you'd see at the bar who thinks he knows everything and is just sitting there pontificating on all this stuff, but with just a little bit more self-awareness than you'd normally see.
Hey, what's Nestor paying us?
$50. And that's $47 more than we got.
Burton had this places closer. Let's do their linoleum today and do the garbage tomorrow.
Nestor's not home tomorrow. Now look, we don't dig today, we don't get paid today. Now damn it, Valentine, you never plan ahead. You never take the long view. I mean, here it is Monday, and I'm already thinking of Wednesday. It is Monday, right?
Also, I like there's this weird kind of gentlemanly quality to him that you don't see in Val as an older guy. Like, if you look at any time he's relating to Rhonda, he's a lot more polite than Val is. He actually respects her opinions and her ideas and values her contribution, or even to the point where he's constantly swearing and saying, oh, pardon my French, that he's suddenly aware of being ungentlemanly around her. I think it's a really nice writing touch, and Ward plays it really well.
He does, and he probably didn't learn that in this town. Do you know what I mean? That was instilled in him by something greater, whether it's a life experience, maybe he was military. To be able as a character actor to give the character you're going to be able to figure out a part of this guy's story without having to have witnessed it, again, in a movie about worms. It's kind of the Quint kind of thing.
Interestingly, some of the people who could have played the part, Michael Caine's agent was pushing him forward as a possible name for it, which
wouldn't have made sense.
No,
I think
really
around
couldn't
the
imagine.
same time he ended up doing Dirty Rotten Scoundrels.
Or Jaws the Revenge. I think that was
Yeah.
around that period,
Oh,
too.
bad choice.
The studio actually wanted James Garner, which I could actually kind of see in a way. Part of the reason they wanted him was because he was suing them over his residuals for the Rockford Files, and they thought maybe giving this part would smooth things over a little bit.
In the Worm movie.
In the Worm movie. Well, it's work, you know.
I do feel like the character of Earl and Valentine, as viewers, we're just coming in the middle of their story. I don't feel like they lived in this town all of their lives.
No,
They seem
definitely
like the kind of characters who they would come upon like the name Perfection on a map and be like, yes, this is where we're going. We're going to perfection. And then they just kind of got trapped there.
Watching it, I'm always curious to kind of imagine the backstory for how these guys ended
Yeah.
up together. If they were
Well-
co-workers, if they just got thrown into some weird situation together.
I didn't catch their last names, and I had assumed that they were relatives. I thought an uncle and a nephew.
They still could be like in-laws or something,
Yeah.
but because
They're-
that's you almost
or,
got that vibe
you know,
with them.
Maternal rather than paternal, but they did have the kind of relationship that one would get from family.
Or I could imagine Earl seeing this kid and deciding he's going to take him under his wing and teach him how things really are and show him how to really live your life. And it's gotten to this point where Val isn't really buying any of his stuff anymore.
Yeah, my second thought, my like flippant thought was Big Brother, Big Sister Club because there's
It's kind of like a Moe and Larry from the Three Stooges thing, you know.
Yeah.
To me, it's like when we were talking about, you know, we're coming into the story. It's kind of like that old-fashioned. Let's just get in the car and drive here and see what comes
Yeah.
of it. Kind of like the old American
And
dream.
now
You
that
gotta
they all
figure-
have to leave Perfection, I wanted to know more about the traveling Earl and Valentine show. I'm not really interested in a Tremors 2 or Tremors 3. I want to see what other kind of adventures they get
Right.
up to.
Going back to the Moe and Larry thing, I like this idea that you have these two guys, except unlike Three Stooges where Moe is the leader, neither of these two guys really emerges as the one in charge. They're both fighting for it the entire time.
Yeah.
And I love watching some of their little physical comedy, like in the first scene when they're
Yes.
they're getting their cigarettes and Val is going through every pocket he has, finally finds some, and Earl
One
can't
has
find his.
the matches in his mouth, the other one has the cigarettes in his mouth. They're both looking for the opposite.
Yeah, it's like that's how they fit in. Each has something that the other needs.
Exactly.
I just think they play well off each other. Like,
They-
I can't imagine any two other people being those two.
And I agree with you, Corinne, especially now. I would love to see the two of them in a movie again.
Yeah.
absolutely.
And I think that would be a really clever, if you're listening, Hollywood, kind of thing to do would be, what happened to like the Bob Hope, you know, or
Bing Crosby, Bob Hope road
You put two
movies?
guys
Yeah.
in a movie, every single one has a different point to it. We should do that again. Create a character and just have there be like this is going to be their horror film, and this is going to be their action.
They could be like the new
comedy.
Abbott and Costello.
Although,
Right.
you know, even if they end up seeing different monsters everywhere they go, I'm cool with that. I just
Absolutely.
want to see them get away from, like, they're leaving that town, and I would just love for the movie makers to have left the monster behind and created something new.
Let's move on to Finn Carter as Rhonda LeBeck. Carter also appeared in How I Got Into College and Ghosts of Mississippi. Her last film was a movie called Halfway Decent in 2005. She actually doesn't have a really big filmography.
Was the movie halfway decent?
No, I've never heard of it.
What?
I gotta say, in the cast, I think Carter's kind of the weak point for me.
She is.
She doesn't really invest it with the weird quirks that the rest of the cast has. I mean, she's a potentially strong character on the page, but it doesn't really feel like she brings much to it beyond that.
I thought we were going to get something from that character when she became very self-conscious of the zinc oxide on her nose after she meets Valentine for the first time, and then she just went flat. She reminded me of, in Evil Dead 2, the woman who comes in with the book.
The archaeologist?
Yes, the
Right.
archaeologist. The two characters felt so close tonally to me. It could have been the same person.
I could definitely see that.
She would have fit much better played as a less goofy Julianne Moore from Evolution.
Yes.
See, I actually would like to have seen somebody who would have played up the nerdier aspects
Yeah,
of
yeah,
it, to
that-
make her feel even farther away from Val's conception of the perfect girl. Because, I mean, other than a little bit with the nose, she has very attractive, almost model looks.
But
She's
she
just-
doesn't have the hazel eyes. Her eyes are blue. She has light brown hair. He wants blonde hair. Her legs, they're not very, very long. And of course, you know, the chest area is not, what do you say, like
World-class
World-class breasts.
World class.
She did not have world-class breasts.
She still felt to me kind of conventionally attractive. I can think of a couple other actresses from the period who would have been more interesting, like Nancy Travis, I think, could have done a better job in it, or even Kira Sedgwick, heck. And I also just didn't feel there was much chemistry between her and Bacon.
She's the only character in there, like you say, that doesn't break the stereotype. She's there for exposition. If she wasn't there for exposition, they probably still would have figured out how to defeat the things, actually.
Yeah.
But
she's there to kind of help along the love arc, and
Yeah.
also, hey, I can see that there's something going on under the ground.
Maybe they were thinking that it would be a twist on the 1950s monster movie where you have the square-jawed scientist guy who explains everything. They thought, we'll make it a woman, but otherwise keep it pretty much the same.
But Valentine did end up saving her. The only time she contributed to their escape plan in any real way was, what was it, pole vaulting.
Well, pole vaulting, she saves Val by kicking open the water tower to get the graboids off of him. She is the one who kind of comes up with the whole plan of going to the mountains.
So where are we supposed to go?
Well, Rhonda's got an idea about that.
Yeah, see, they move very easily through the Pleistocene alluvials. The dirt. The loose soil that covers the valley floor. But they can't move through rock. So I think we should head west to the mountains.
That is true.
She's got a couple of contributions. I think, again, with a different actress, it's actually a decently strong part. But, I don't know, there's just not enough there for me.
Well, it's not a movie that has a lot of character development.
Yeah.
No, it's mostly in little tiny touches.
Yeah.
But I think they could have
It's sparse.
found more, yeah. Next, we cut to the actor who's pretty much become the signature face of the series, Michael Gross, as Burt Gummer. Of course, Gross is best known as Stephen Keaton on Family Ties. He'd also appear in Big Business, also with Fred Ward. Cool as Ice with Master Thespian Vanilla Ice, that's right. And in various television programs, such as he played John Carter Sr. on ER for an episode and on How I Met Your Mother. He would play Burt in all the subsequent Tremors sequels and the TV series, and he's set to appear in the 5th movie that's supposed to be out at some point later on this year. He actually began filming his role the day that he finished work on Family Ties. He left that set and jumped right into this one.
Finished the crying, moved on.
They parallel perfectly.
Well, you can see why. I mean, he'd want to do something really different. I mean, you can't get more different from the very liberal Steve Keaton than this guy.
The change in facial hair was enough that I did not recognize him at all, and I religiously watched Family Ties when I was a kid.
I was the same guy.
No idea who he was.
Gummer is a very, very disturbing last name to me, and I don't know why. There's just something wrong.
It has
about
something
that
kind of
last
rude-like
name.
about it.
Yeah.
And I like
I feel
that.
like you want to say Gunner because all the guns.
Right.
Well, I like how that
remembering
fits in with the character and with Val and Earl, too, that he's a lot more than he appears.
They should either be A, laughable and you write them off, or B, such a stupidly blatant stereotype of what they are that you throw away the movie as either being preachy against or preachy for. When
Right.
characters and instead they just exist.
He's a character that could be held up for laughs as a caricature, and they do at the beginning of the movie. They're like making fun of him for his lifestyle, but it turns out that lifestyle is really handy in a crisis.
I also think there was a moment that I did not like those two characters at all until they came to the point where they were going away from the city, and they're like, we were prepared for everything except something under the ground.
Food for 5 years. 1,000 gallons of gas, air filtration, water filtration, Geiger counter, bomb shelter. Underground. Goddamn monsters.
And it's kind of like, oh, well, no matter how much you prepare, something could happen that you're not expecting.
And it made them real. Like
Yes.
right there. It was
great.
because it was desperation.
I mean, they had guns on the walls, like on pegboards where people usually
They
have
even had a
tools.
break in case of
And-
emergency gun.
And they call it their rec room. But then they come out and they kind of break it down where no matter how prepared you are, you're just not going to be prepared for everything.
And yet it's a lot of his planning that saves them in the end with the bombs, with the
Absolutely.
guns, everything.
Doomsday preppers.
The director, Ron Underwood, was actually skeptical about whether Gross could play the part. Apparently in his audition, Gross suddenly jumped onto the desk in his office and was pretending like they were graboids in the floorboards and did it so convincingly that Underwood immediately said, yep, this is the guy for the part. As with Val, there's a lot of great little subtle costume things, too. Like, apparently Gross insisted that he have a baseball cap, and they asked him, well, would you like a sports hat? Like, sure, whatever team, as long as it's something from the South. So what do they choose but the Atlanta Hawks? And as this war hawk type character, that just feels like a perfect choice.
So does everybody else kind of feel like these characters, most of them anyway, came to perfection and they weren't native to perfection?
I don't think any of them are.
Yeah. I think these were all characters who had managed to get there. There's a type of film, and I know that Quentin Tarantino is basically doing that right now with The Hateful Eight, where all of these different characters end up in one place.
It's sort of the Stagecoach movie.
Exactly.
Yeah, we have characters from all different walks of life who just get thrown into a situation.
And even though we're set up that they all live in perfection, none of them really feel like they've been there their entire lives.
So it's like that post-Cold War, World War II, this is where everything got forgotten kind of town, and last Starfighter-ish kind of area.
The trailer park that, everybody just kind of ends up in and doesn't go anywhere from.
Correct. It has a modern day or a sad residual gold rush thing to it, where it's like, all these people came here, why? Well, shit, we don't remember. How did we end up here? Because everything is rusted and thrown together and looks like it was dragged there from somewhere else.
Everything looks like it's been there for 100 years, exactly like that. And these people just moved and were like, oh, look, a house.
Right.
I'm going to live right there.
I would at least say the guy that owns the store has probably been there his whole life.
No, but his sign, Walter Chang's, is painted over something else that's faded out.
Oh, I never noticed
and it's
that.
brand new paint on an old broken down building.
I didn't notice
So
that.
where did everyone go that used to live there?
Probably
like
moved
I
on
said,
like Val and Earl
Maybe
did.
there were Tremors.
No, or maybe the Tremors ate them all. Yeah, no,
I was
that's
just thinking that.
And
it's interesting that there was someone that was going to retire there. Like, there's nothing there. Why would you retire there?
Cheap land.
Maybe because there's nothing there.
And from
Maybe
the
they want to
sound,
get away
that
from
from
it.
the sound
yeah.
of things, Bixby, which is kind of like the heaven, like allegory thing. Because
It
this
is,
reminds me
yes.
of a lot of From Dusk Till Dawn. Like they're all just kind of stuck in purgatory and have
And
to
they're all
find their
talking
way
about
out.
going to El Rey.
And
this
they're all
horrible
talking about
place,
going
yeah.
to El Rey. This
Yeah.
Bixby place, whether made up or not, is probably where university is probably where all these people are coming from. When you're in the middle of Nevada, where do you buy a summer house or go on vacation to? You know what I mean? You got to get away from all the people that are coming in and taking over your area.
Go to the desert.
And Bert and Heather, notably, are the only ones who really seem to want to be there. They chose it because it's isolated, because it's away from everybody else. And I assume because if World War III happens, they'll feel they'll be safer there.
Right.
Next, we come to Reba McEntire as Heather Gummer. Of course, McEntire is best known as a country singer and songwriter, and this was actually her first film role, though she'd go on to appear in North.
I recognized her in North. She looked like the Reba McEntire that I know. Here, she was so young, her hair wasn't as red as I remember it.
She'd also appear in The Little Rascals and One Night at McCool's, in addition to her television work in the sitcoms Reba and Malibu Country, and on stage in Annie Get Your Gun in South Pacific.
I loved her in this role.
She's really good.
It's a lot closer to how she grew up than you'd think.
Yeah, I've read that her familiarity with guns from her upbringing paid off here, because you can see she really looks like she knows what she's doing.
She grew up on a ranch, so this was like her and her element.
She
looked very, very comfortable.
She came off as such a strong character without really having anything. Like, the movie doesn't have an arc for her to be anything other than what shows up as this goofy doomsday prepper's wife, and she really comes off as the strong one in the relationship. Like, he's got all the ideas, but she's always the one that's got him covered. Like, yes, I took care of that. Oh, I got the magazine.
Well,
for
she's
you.
the one that's always like, all right, calm down, calm down.
Not just that, but he asks her recommendation on which guns to bring.
Yeah.
She is the know-how.
What do you think? Max firepower or this?
I go for penetration, the 458, shooting solids, less ammo to carry.
And I like that McEntire plays it a lot less cartoony than Gross does. She reins it in, and I think that's really important.
She feels like she lives there. If there was anything close to what a resident of perfection would be, it would be her. Not even her husband, because her husband is still, I'm here because I want to be. She seems like she just could have been born there and was just fine with everything.
She seems like she came from a very isolated place to begin with.
Apparently, when they were doing the sequels, one of the big stipulations for making the second one a theatrical release was whether they could get her back to be in it. But unfortunately, she was too busy. And
I actually
couldn't
enjoy
come
the
back.
second one.
I
It's
do too.
stupid, but I like it.
But it's a bummer when they write out her character. It's kind of disappointing. Next is Victor Wong as Walter Chang. Of course, we saw him recently as Egg Shen in Big Trouble in Little China, and he also appeared in Prince of Darkness, The Golden Child, Joy Luck Club, and the Three Ninjas films.
Light up the eyes, boys!
Oh, Victor Wong.
He doesn't get a whole lot to do here, but he's kind of the entrepreneur of the group. The graboids show up, he immediately sees dollar signs and how they could write themselves into the history of them by naming them. He's big on getting the name.
Not just that, we were talking about the idea of these characters coming in from different places and the gold rush and the railroads in the West that were built by Asian Chinese immigrants. So in a way, it's very representative of American history that he's definitely not from that area, but he's made the best of it.
He seems to drive what little business there is in that area. All of the stuff that they're always out doing, it's always for him.
Did anybody notice that it is the post office? As well as the bar.
Yes. And the video store.
And the video store and the convenience store.
Yeah.
It is the place in town. There's nothing else.
Yeah, everybody hangs out there. And when there's a meeting to be held, everyone's there.
This was the early 90s. Around the time when, Japan and China did everything electronic. They were bringing in lots of things. There was an influx of materials from there. They did everything. So Victor Wong did everything.
We talk about these characters all having a story before they got there. I look at Victor Wong as being a character that, was in a very saturated area before that. Like, maybe in a Chinatown or in an inner city type of setting where, okay, I'm the fifth stereotypical Asian guy that owns this convenience store, this jeweler shop, or whatever on the street. And you know what? I'm going out there and I'm going to find my thing. And he's in this town. There's nothing there, nothing to do. What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to do what I was doing there, but now I'm the only guy doing it.
Yeah, he thought he could be the central hub of the town, saw a chance to set himself up. Next we come to Bobby Jacoby as Melvin Plug. You might remember him from Iron Eagle, Pee-wee's Big Adventure, where he's the kid in the movie who gets the bike.
Yep.
Meet the Applegates and Night of the Demons 2. And he would actually come back to the role of Melvin in Tremors number 3. And Melvin's pretty much for the most part obnoxious and flippant until the graboids show up, and then we actually get to see kind of the scared little kid underneath.
Not quite. I mean, he's still giving people the finger and mouthing off and not listening and not doing what he's told. I mean, we do see some genuine human emotion from him. He basically climbs the pole the first time he encounters a graboid, but he still plays that brat kid the whole way through.
But it shines through as a front.
Yeah.
Instead of like in every other movie where it would be, okay, this is the comic relief brat kid. I won't say fully shines through, but it shines through as being like, oh, okay, this is why he is that way. And you never quite get the idea is, who is he doing it to show off to? Right? Is it Kevin Bacon's character, who he almost seems to just kind of have a silly back and forth? Or is it Earl? Because Earl's always the one doing the fatherly thing with him.
Earl's a cool dude.
Yeah.
It's probably
Where the hell
Earl.
are the kids' parents?
Well, in the script, there was originally a line that would have revealed they were like gamblers who would drop him there as they went off to Vegas and just kind of got adopted by the town. Because for the longest time, I thought he was the son of Nestor, the guy who gets eaten on the trailer. Because you can see when Nestor gets eaten, that's when we get the biggest reaction of him, when he completely breaks down and screams at them to do something.
No way, man. No, you guys gotta do something. You gotta do something.
Next, we have Ariana Richards as Mindy Sterngood. Of course, Richards is best known as Lex Murphy, the girl with the $1 million scream from Jurassic Park.
That's right.
So she gets a lot of practice in being afraid of large animals in this movie. She doesn't really get much to do other than scream at things and do that little kid thing of tripping over absolutely nothing during the scene when everyone's trying to run.
She had the pogo stick.
She did have the pogo stick, that's true.
I remember doing that exact thing, using the pogo stick, counting how many times I could hop without falling off. She's kind of the oblivious child.
She's also the oblivious 80s carryover child that you didn't see
Yeah.
that much anymore in the 90s.
She had the headphones, too.
Yeah.
Yep.
They didn't really seem to have a place after a while. The 90s was, though, when we put a kid in the movie, they will be the focal point.
I guess in a way, maybe she sort of symbolizes the rest of the defenseless town members. I mean, she's the ultimate in helpless. Let's go quick through the rest of the cast. Charlotte Stewart as Nancy Sterngood. She was a favorite of David Lynch. She played Mary X, Jack Nance's creepy girlfriend from Eraserhead, and Betty Briggs from Twin Peaks. We have Tony Gennaro as Miguel. He'd also appear in a bunch more films for director Ron Underwood, including Hearts and Souls, Speechless, and the remake of Mighty Joe Young, as well as Phenomenon, The Mask of Zorro, and World Trade Center. And I gotta say, I was really, really happy that he survived the movie. Because when I first saw it, I thought, oh, the Hispanic guy, they're definitely going to kill him in some horrible way.
Yeah, I was
but
waiting for Tony Gennaro and Victor Wong to die. I thought the movie was going to do that.
But I like that Miguel not only survives, he actually has the good idea of using the tractor to get the graboids out of there and let Val get to the truck. So he gets to contribute to the escape plan, too. Then there's Richard Marcus as the ill-fated Nestor Cunningham. He also appeared in Enemy Mine with Dennis Quaid, Deadly Friend, the Wes Craven movie, The Pretender in 24. He's mostly kind of the skeptical one. He doesn't really seem to believe they're in much danger and doesn't recognize when he's in real huge danger, like just sitting on a tire. Doesn't get the fact that that's not enough. And he's kind of there to get eaten.
Yep, that's all he was there for.
He's graboid fodder.
There's Conrad Bachman as Jim Wallace, the Doctor. As his wife is Bibi Besh as Megan Wallace, who's best known as Carol Marcus from Star Trek II. And, of course, they get one of the nastiest ends in the movie.
Yeah, so I had mentioned that a little bit earlier, but that scene just bums me the fuck out. Because we talk about Kevin Bacon and all of them getting out of there, and here's two people that just came there seeking exactly that. The farmer being the first one to, like, really get offed on screen. Okay, fine. The farmers always get offed in these movies, and he was there by himself. He was probably sad anyway. These two people... It's so damn sad, and the entire way that it works, like, she is so happy, and they're so happy. It's the only death that comes off as brutal. It's the only death that feels like it's fully out of a horror movie. The rest of it's there to kind of be silly. That one just breaks my brain.
You got to kind of go with me on this one.
Okay.
But they want to be there, they're retiring, and they're going to perfection.
Oh, so they're committing suicide?
Well, no, they're not committing suicide.
That makes it even worse. No, I'm kidding. They're in heaven.
They're not quite. They're two couples, both of which have decided that perfection is where they are going to live. Their perfection has been destroyed, which kind of is like the idea that perfection is unattainable. There's always something that is going to break through. Something is, you're going to get some clouds. There's nothing is perfect.
That goes through the whole thing, kind of like with Kevin Bacon and his perfect girl.
It is his perfect girl. However, those two characters that want to leave perfection, in a way...
accepting the real world for what it is.
Yeah, exactly.
No perfect life, perfect woman.
Hey, if you want to get biblical, you have two people in perfection, and their perfection is ruined by a serpent.
Oh, Christ almighty.
Sorry, I had to.
No, it's pretty good.
And the other thing, they make the comment of, it struck me when I was little, we can always be here looking up at the stars.
Yes.
And the damn car, she gets eaten with the car pointing upward and everything, and the awesome lights. And it comes off like it's out of a horror film. And this again, is staged as a horror film, but like a creature feature. And that was damn near brutal.
No, I didn't catch the music that was playing in the car as it was going down. Did anybody catch the lyrics
I can't remember
to that?
I did notice the lyrics that it's a woman alone with just her and the candlelight at a table.
Yes.
Yeah, see?
See, watching that scene made me think of me and you, because you'd be the idiot that would want to go and explore whatever the hell happened, and I'd be the one pulling you going, come on, let's go! So that would be how you and I would go, because I'd be alone in a car scared to death, because you were an idiot and had to go explore.
You would have had your own set of keys, though.
But that scene always, what really does it for me is Bibi Besh's performance. Both the terror that she has, and when she gets in the car and it's silent and she starts weeping, the sadness of realizing her husband's just been pulled to a really gruesome, horrible death. Let's get to the crew. The director was Ron Underwood. Before this, he mostly did animated movies like The Mouse and the Motorcycle and Runaway Ralph, and he had actually been attached to direct Short Circuit by the same screenwriters, but ended up stepping aside when he realized his involvement was what kept it from being picked up by one of the studios. So this was his live-action feature directing debut, but he'd go on to direct City Slickers right after this.
Which I love.
Huge hit. Yep.
It was a massive hit.
Yep.
And City Slickers, another movie thinking back on that just looked gorgeous and didn't really necessarily have any reason to. This movie here, it was gorgeous, and they were filming ugly shit.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And it was still gorgeous.
He'd also do Heart and Souls from the same writers, Speechless, the remake of Mighty Joe Young, which is a vastly underrated. I love that movie. And unfortunately, The Adventures of Pluto Nash. After that, he kind of moved on to TV.
Probably ruined his film career a little bit.
That didn't help anyone involved.
But Underwood felt that Universal sold the movie more as a straight horror movie than the horror comedy that he felt it was. He really wanted to be kind of a pastiche of the old 50s sci-fi movies. And I think he does a great job at capturing the tone, that horror comedy tone that's become more prevalent now.
I think that this movie did borrow a significant amount from Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2, specifically the Monster Camp, exactly. Monster Camp, there were some of the characters, like I said earlier, the scientist, the seismologist versus the archaeologist, the character basically being the same character, but
the fact that your
different
hero
names.
is kind of a fuck up.
Yeah, that you're exactly.
In fact, if there were part of me saying I'm surprised Bruce Campbell isn't in this film.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
It has that feel to it.
And let's talk about the writers, S.S. Wilson and Brent Maddock. Wilson and Maddock met in film school in USC, where they also met Underwood, and collaborated on a whole bunch of educational movies, and apparently contributed jokes to a bunch of Looney Tunes cartoons.
That would make sense.
Their big breakout was with Short Circuit, which was based on one of those educational films, and that got them enough clout that they were able to get this made. They also, besides the sequel to that movie, they also wrote Batteries Not Included, Ghost Dad, Heart and Souls, and contributed, but not completely, to Wild Wild West, so we can't blame them for that one. Apparently, they became producers on this one because so many of their other scripts had been rearranged and messed with. They really wanted to have creative control. They would co-write Tremors 2, Aftershocks, which Wilson directed, and then Maddock would direct and Wilson produce Tremors 3, and Wilson would return to direct Tremors 4. Unfortunately, neither of them have anything to do with the fifth one that's coming up. And the idea for the script came when Wilson was working in the desert and was sitting on this rock and suddenly had the idle thought of, what if there was a creature under this rock and I couldn't get off? It was just waiting to eat me if I actually set foot on it. And from that little idea sprang pretty much the entire screenplay, which was originally titled Land Shark until they realized if they called it that, all anybody would be able to think of was Chevy Chase at the door saying, Mrs. Plummer, Candygram.
Candygram.
Other potential titles for the movie included Dead Silence, Graboids, and Beneath Perfection.
That's it's kind of on the nose when it comes to the themes in the movie.
One of the big ideas for the script was they wanted to set up, as their heroes, the two kind of dim-witted characters who would be the first guys to be killed in a normal creature movie. These would
also
be the idiots
true.
who would stumble right into death, but no, these are the guys who are going to end up falling.
Also,
feels very Tucker and Dale.
Usually the shot of them being the opening shot in the film would have been the second sequence in the film where, you're establishing the people in the town and they go, oh, where's Val and Earl? And then Val and Earl are off, pissing over the side of the ravine, and that they're the first. It's like, oh, this is going to be the sequence of these two dimwits getting eaten. Mm-hmm. And this is how you set up your Scream. It's the kids at the beginning of Scream getting off before the credits roll. Instead, they're the only ones that can save us.
Let's talk about the cinematography. The movie was photographed by Alexander Gruzinski, who also photographed Bad Dreams, Cast a Deadly Spell, again with Fred Ward, Angus, The Craft, Dick, and several movies in the Medea series. We were talking about the look of the movie. I love how harsh they shoot the desert with all the sunlight just bursting off the rocks and the sand. It just feels really hot and arid.
Yeah, it was gorgeous, and it didn't have to be.
I also noticed watching it this time how the color was sometimes just desaturated just a little bit, which I thought was an interesting touch.
Everything kind of feels tan.
Yeah.
Well, the idea of things being bleached out.
And the color choices, too. The truck being blue was so perfectly, like the color of the sky contrasted. All of their clothes did the same thing. They all popped out.
The music was by Ernest Troost and Robert Folk. Troost was the composer, but Folk was actually brought in to punch up the score and rewrote about a half hour of it, but declined to receive credit. And you can tell, the main music almost sounds a little like Danny Elfman's score for Midnight Run with the guitar. And there are bits in there, especially as things get heavy, where you can feel the music shifts into something entirely different, like the scene where they're on the roof of the store and the ground is dipping. It sounds like a completely different composer.
It does.
It sounds a little bit more like standard horror movie music. Not bad, but just very, very different. Let's talk about the creatures. The creature effects were by Amalgamated Dynamics, Inc., a company started by a couple of Stan Winston's proteges, Alec Gillis and Tom Woodruff Jr. They've created creatures for a lot of the Alien films. They won an Oscar for Death Becomes Her and did work for Wolf.
Oh, Death
Mars
Becomes
Attacks.
Her!
Yep. And recently the Thing prequel, where unfortunately a lot of their work got covered over with CGI.
I loved these monsters. They were great. You just don't see stuff like that anymore. They had weight because they were real. Even when this is a puppet, but it was wonderful. And the way they showed them, the way it was filmed, where sometimes you only saw a tail or sometimes you only saw one of the little things inside its mouth. That there's this giant monster under there, but it's so clever so that they can keep the budget down, I'm sure. But it was brilliant.
We talk about, the heyday of digital effects, and this is really kind of like one of the carryovers, right? There's nothing digital in this fucker.
No.
So it's like, remember, it's all models and miniatures and reverse footage and all that stuff that made the 80s and 70s creature features so great. almost all of the awesome happens during the day, like a lot of Jaws.
Well, creature features and horror movies usually take place in the dark, and this era of filmmaking and horror, and you're not even safe in the light.
Yes.
During the day, you're still not safe.
Yes. And also, just like Jaws, it's all how they affect the world around them.
But also, in a lot of how the creatures are shot when they're on the surface, that thing of them affecting the environment rather than actually seeing the creatures. One of my favorite shots is one where you see the dust plume go into like this metal fence, and the fence just kind of dents for a second.
And allowed for them to embody a natural disaster. Most of the damage that they did wasn't from them reaching up and eating anybody. You know, it was normally they'd come up, rah, like piss everybody off, and then, no, they're going to make your house fucking fall down.
Did anybody else, and I'm sure this connection has been made millions of times, these are the sandworms. They are pretty much the sandworms, and I kept wondering, why aren't you guys just dragging your feet?
Right.
Haven't you learned your lesson from Dune?
Well, the rhythm thing doesn't seem to have much of an effect in this one, unfortunately. I kept thinking if they had a couple of those thumpers, they would have been all set. I like how they use a whole bunch of different techniques to bring them out, too. It's like a different effect in every shot. Some, they're the full-scale head. Sometimes they're a really good puppet
I think
miniature.
it might have even been stop motion a couple of times.
I don't know if there was any stop motion. I didn't recognize any.
I definitely saw puppet work, and it was.
I
loved
love
it.
And you know, I'm a sucker for reverse footage. Raimi used it a lot, and I loved it every time that he did. It's when, like, to show something coming out of something's mouth, instead of working up the armature to actually make it come out, you roll it out on the ground and drag it back in, but then roll the film in reverse so it looks like it's coming out. And it gives it this otherworldly, like, jerky, like, that can't actually be doing that kind of look.
Oh, wow.
Parts of the way the Graboid was designed and some of the way it moved reminded me a lot of Audrey 2 from Little Shop of Horrors.
I can definitely see that.
So I think they may have drawn a little inspiration from that because they have some similar features. You mentioned that this company also worked with Alien, the idea of something else really small and terrifying coming out of a larger mouth.
Apparently, the guys at ADI considered this their purest work in terms of design, because most of the other movies they were doing, like Alien movies and stuff, they were working off somebody else's creature. This is the first one they got to really create on their own from the ground up. And they used all sorts of different animal parts. The one thing they didn't use much of, what they said, was earthworms, because they thought earthworms were too boring.
Well, I think they got the basic shape from earthworm. The idea that the head splits apart like a seed pod, but when it's all shut, it still has that shape of an earthworm head. I love that they took a basic shape, a tube, and they tweaked it here and there, but you still get the feeling that if you were really, really, really tiny, to be the same scale as the Graboid and a human, an earthworm and a human, it would be so similar under the ground, the way it moves. And
I love that Rhonda was around to explain one of these things.
Yes.
And again, she doesn't sell it quite as well as she could have, but when you're gonna design something that cool, one, the movie never shows you the whole damn thing until it's dead.
Yep.
Which is awesome. When a movie has this much of its creature, but they still use less is more, like it's in broad daylight and yet you still aren't sick of looking at it after a while, she gets to come in and say, you know somebody in the design lab is like, well, they better have like little like hair, like feet things that come up. She can point it out and like play with them. Oh, this must be how it moves. And as a viewer, you sit there and go, this is awesome. They're taking the time in a movie that shouldn't give a shit about this to tell us how it works.
And establishing how it hunts, the idea that it hunts on vibration, that it has these rules, this sort of behavior that it follows, and that can be used by the characters later on to try and evade them.
I think that this monster connects us between the classic monsters where they did stuff and it was illogical. How is that turtle flying? And now...
because it has rocket boosters in there, goddammit. He's the friend of children.
And the monsters of now, where we have to scientifically and biologically explain how every single thing works or it's not right. So Tremors is the connection between those two eras in monster movies.
It gives us just enough. We know enough of why it could barrel through like a locomotive because of those little pokey things. We know how it hunts, and the characters know how it hunts. Just enough. We don't really need too much more. And I like the fact we never find out where they're from. We don't know exactly what they are.
Right.
They're mutations caused by radiation. Or no. Government built them. Big surprise for the Russians.
Well, there's nothing like them in the fossil record, I'm sure. Okay, so they predate the fossil record. Well, that'd make them a couple of billion years old. And we've just never seen one till now. Right.
I vote for outer space. No way these are local boys.
Also, when they're like, I don't know what they're doing, and we do find out that they're building a trap, did anybody else think, oh no, they're mating, and this is how we get Tremors 2?
I admit that hadn't occurred to me at that particular
No,
moment.
I never even thought of that.
That's clever, though. No, that's good. Another thing that I really like is it doesn't make that mistake that too many movies that have come since make like this, where there has to be a military presence. Now, I love the monster movie with the military versus the monsters at the end, but these things, as we show, enough firepower and they're gone.
Yeah.
As soon as the nukes come in, they're not there anymore. You know what I mean? So they found a way for a movie to exist in the 90s where it can still be that they're that secluded, almost like we talked about it being purgatory and heaven and hell, almost like the rest of the world really doesn't exist in the grand context of things.
Well, isolation is kind of a key to good horror movies, like The Thing, for example.
One of the
for
best
instance,
ways.
to speak of a modern day creature feature, the original Jurassic Park, that's another thing I love about the original Jurassic Park is the whole isolation aspect, the aspect of we really are cut off from the world and we're just kind of stuck here with these things until the morning.
One of the best ways to introduce a problem for your characters is to deeply isolate them and have that become the problem. How do you get out of this isolation? Because that will help you in whatever you're trying to defeat or overcome.
Going back to like her, the scientist, Rhonda, being able to ascertain different things about them, how whenever there was a question, they all would look at her and...
Hey, Rhonda, what do you think it's trying to do now?
Why do you keep asking me?
And
that was wonderful.
Great.
I thought that was great because
she's a seismologist.
She's a scientist. You know this stuff.
On the other hand, she's the one who keeps spouting off about what it might be doing, so it does
well,
kind of
that's
make
why,
sense.
because she's been able to ascertain some stuff, so they think, well, she knows this, she's got to know this too.
She does have a scientific bent, but seismology is so far away from zoology and biology that she does have a point. Why are they asking her?
Yeah.
Well, that people from the town probably have more experience with animals than she does.
Yes, also true.
All right, so I'm going to ask the question, where does everybody think the graboids come from? Do you think outer space? Do you think mutants? Do you think government program for the Ruskies?
I think it's probably just a mutation or something.
I think they're Lovecraftian. I think it doesn't matter where they come from. The fact that they exist and they are not just a menace, but they are a devastating force, that's enough.
To deconstruct it, I always like to go with... I like the idea of creatures from outer space, but that's played off. And so hitting on the Lovecraftian or the predating our knowledge, I always love that idea. That brings up the Godzilla thing. It's like, this thing's just been here. You know what I mean? And you are teeny, teeny, tiny in the grand scheme of things. And these people aren't necessarily safe. If these things exist, that means there's more of them somewhere.
I always think of them almost like cryptozoological creatures, like something you'd read about in 40 Times, like Nessie or Bigfoot or something. This idea that there's something absolutely bizarre that somebody might have seen somewhere, had a blurry photograph of, but nobody can really explain. And this is finally, some of them have come to the surface, so to speak. Universal had originally insisted they include a scene that definitively would have had them coming from space, where Bert and Heather would have found their crashed spaceship.
No,
but nobody in the crew liked it, and they refused to shoot it.
I love the ambiguity.
Yep.
Stupid.
There's no point in seeing them come from space if we have no entry point into the ground.
Yeah.
There was also a scene that they actually did film, supposedly, that would have implied that an earthquake had somehow released these things from deeper in the earth, but it had to be cut because they showed a coyote being killed by one of them, and the preview audience felt the movie was already cruel enough toward animals anyway. They didn't want to see it.
that horse scene.
Brutal.
I had a lot of trouble with that. I know how dangerous that is for a horse. And I know they were doing that with horses and not with models or CGI. So it was painful. It was a really painful scene.
I'm hoping that most of it was just a matter of good editing, that it was just a horse moving, and if you shoot it the right way and cut it the right way, it looks more frantic.
Even just a horse being on their side like that, like, when you put an animal on its side, a horse rather, on its side like that, it's usually for veterinary purposes. And
No, some horses lay like that.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have never...
Lexi works at a barn.
I have never seen a horse lay on its side.
And I guess, I mean,
I've definitely seen them, like kind of sit. But
I'm going to say this without it sounding insensitive to the reaction. I think that's why it works.
It is why it works.
Definitely.
Because the animal looks like it's in pain.
Yeah.
And that could also be the effects work and everything on it too. But I mean, they've been training horses both incorrectly, like say in the old Wild West movies, and then correctly for a very long period of time. So I'd like to think, I would fingers
hope so.
Crossed, that's something that horse is just trained to do well.
I don't know for certain either way, but that thrashing just made me
horrifying.
so uncomfortable.
And I always think every time I watch it that Kevin Bacon's going to kill the horse. I mean, granted, the idea is that the horse died,
right.
But I always think that's what he's going to do in that scene. And I'm glad that it's almost like he has that. We talked about the character having an almost sort of like there's more to him than just the goofy guy, and that I like. It's like, you know what? Yeah, this horse is going down, but you know what? I'm going to try to save it.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Or avenge it.
Or avenge it, and I like that in that sequence. But yeah, just like the elderly people in the car, that scene is just, it tonally works because it sets up, okay, there's real stakes here, but it is definitely far harsher than anything else in the film.
Besides the creatures, some of the other effects work was done by Forward Productions, formed by Robert and Dennis Skotek, who do a lot of model work. They did work for Aliens, The Abyss, Terminator 2, and Titanic. And pretty much any shot where you can see the graboid beyond just like the head, where it's moving around, that's a model. So they built a lot of models of the houses for all the scenes where it's destroying the foundations. Any of the landscape shots where you can see them kind of curling over it, that's a tabletop miniature of the desert. And it's practically seamless. I mean,
it's gorgeous.
Well, I mean, usually I can tell when there's a model, and I gotta tell you, I didn't see one model in this. And I know there were models. I read that there were models, but I did not really see them. They did such a great job
and this is why
of marrying the two.
Why you got to remind people, even now, like this movie now would probably, again, if they tried to do it all practical, would probably be a $25-30 million movie. You can do this shit.
One shot in particular that always amazes me is during the attack in the Gummer's basement, where there's a shot where Bert drops a rifle, and we can see the actor is dropping it. We pan from that right over to the creature coming through the wall, and that's a model. They actually matched a shot of the real gun to the miniature gun.
That's another thing.
I didn't see that.
And panned and
they're
cut
blue
and
screening.
I thought that was a giant version of the graboid. I didn't even know that was a model.
Yep.
Their blue screening and work getting the actors seamed in is right. It's seamless.
One other special effects person we have to mention is Gene Warren, who created that great shot of the POV when it goes through the hill and we suddenly just see the dirt flying out around, which was apparently a camera in like a transparent tube. And they either dumped dirt on it, or I think I actually read they pulled it out and ran it in reverse so the dirt looks like it's flying around it. And I love that moment. It's such a shock where it's going through this hill and all of a sudden, boom, you cut to that POV. It's fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about the influence and influences on the film. We mentioned how Jaws was certainly a clear influence on the look of the film and how they did all of the creature effects. And you had mentioned the tone of this movie, which I think is important, that so many other movies since then, like Slither and
Grabbers, Monsters, any of those sci-fi, humor, horror films all just owe this movie a great debt. And this movie owes Evil Dead.
I agree. It has that same kind of absolutely crazy, off-the-wall, anything-goes style to it that comes out of Sam Raimi films.
And organic, too. This and Evil Dead, I mean, Evil Dead 2, to a lesser extent, because it took the horror, the comedy direction, and one came before
it did.
But Evil Dead 2, Evil Dead, and this, they all feel very organic. They feel like your first reaction to it is, been there, done that, saw this. I mean, Evil Dead is the Cabin in the Woods film. Do you know what I mean? Been there, done that, saw this, till you watch it. And I think even remembering Tremors, I remember a lesser movie. I remember some of the movies that you said, you've just seen so many of them that it feels almost like a rehash. When you think of Tremors, you think of, Critters or, something like that, where it's just, okay, yeah, it's in the same vein, but this movie's goddamn inventive. You got the guys with the jackhammer, and he actually cuts into one of them and makes it bleed. Like, that thing, like, it was just sitting there waiting, and then takes it and runs away with it. And, like, something like that, it's like, no, a lesser movie, a movie made nowadays with the Michael Bay mentality would have been like, no, we don't want to see the goddamn jackhammer move, we want to see the graboid.
How long was it before we saw any part of the graboid.
Probably a good half hour. It's that first one that wraps around the axle of the truck is really
and
the first
such
thing
a good,
see.
such a good red herring
it's
too.
a great
right?
fake out. Yeah,
And
you think it's a
how-
bunch of snake things, and then we realize no, it's something more.
And how long before we see that it is a giant monster?
Right after they get knocked off of the horses.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the first moment where the head erupts.
There are very few films that will take that sort of time to reveal their monster. Like, this movie isn't very complex as far as characters go or setting. Or,
its setup is complex, is what it really
right.
is.
But the whole setup is the monster and just getting little peeks of the monster as we go, kind of ramping up the tension.
The movie in New York with the monster.
Oh,
Cloverfield.
Cloverfield. No,
you don't see that monster till the end, and even then you don't see much of it at all.
I think the newer Godzilla film did the same thing.
Yep.
You get bits and pieces of the monster until the very end. You see it in all of its glory. And that's one of the reasons I love that Godzilla film so much. And I know a lot of people wanted more Godzilla, but we know what Godzilla looks like generally. I was so much more interested in seeing bits and pieces, the people point of view of the monster.
That's what I was going to say, is seeing it that way is almost more realistic of how someone in that situation is going to see it.
You get little bits of the monster before you see it entirely. You have full knowledge of the scope of this creature.
And that goes to the movie poster. I mean, if you look at it, we're not even actually seeing the creature on there. What we're seeing is one of the tentacle things with teeth added to it, and that was on purpose. They decided they didn't want to show the actual graboid on the poster.
If you notice, it's freaking Jaws.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is.
It is the Jaws poster.
It looks like a dinosaur.
But the poster is Jaws.
Yeah.
Like this.
The poster is giving you the tone of the movie. It's saying, yes, we're going to be a monster movie, but we're referencing Jaws right here in a kind of humorous way, so we're going to be funny, too.
One thing I think that separates it from movies like Evil Dead, that always reminds me almost a little bit of Shaun of the Dead, is the fact that you have a bunch of comedic characters, but the monsters are played dead serious. There's nothing ever goofy about the creatures. They are played completely straight. And part of the suspense is seeing characters that you might see in a comedy wandering around in a horror movie, and the very strong potential that they could be gobbled up. Anytime they're attacked, it's never played for laughs. It's always really horrific.
Stakes are real.
Exactly. And I think they feel a little bit more real by the fact that these aren't horror movie characters. These are comedy characters in a horror movie. They're a little bit more lovable as a result of that.
There's nobody that's a gross or nasty or vindictive. Like, they never do the horror movie thing where this person's gonna die because I don't like them.
Yeah, they never make it so you're cheering on that you want to see somebody killed by it, except perhaps Melvin. But for the most part, you don't want these people to get eaten.
None of these characters have any more development than in a standard horror movie, but you're much more invested in them because they're personable.
They show you their life in little snippets, but they show you
just all these weird little quirky things that make them feel like odd, strange characters, and you're interested in them.
We could break every single one of their characters down into horror movie tropes, and it would work, but that's not what this film is about. I mean, it could have been completely rewritten as a straight-out horror film.
Or a straight-out comedy.
Or a straight-out comedy. Both would have been equally as successful to the other, but I think the tone that they went with was the most successful choice.
The movie originally received an R rating for language, leaving to some edits to take out
Mother
the word
humper.
fuck. Except for the one reaction where the graboid rammed through the wall.
We killed it. Fuck you!
Always remember when this movie was on TV, it was one of the worst sound edits I've ever heard, where Val suddenly turns and goes,
We killed it. Screw you!
Yes!
It was awful.
Yes!
It's right up there with the Yippee-Ki-Yay Mr. Falcon from Die Hard 2 as one of the worst overdubbings of a curse
But I love
word
I've had it with these monkey fighting snakes on this Monday to Friday plane.
Oh, God. A couple of the other scenes deleted from the movie, there was originally a very different opening where we would have seen Edgar, the guy who ended up on the tower, meeting up with Old Fred the farmer. And as Old Fred leaves after dropping off some supplies, the graboids start attacking Edgar and we see him run off.
That scene is dead weight.
Yeah, it's better cut than just introducing Edgar on the tower as this weird mystery to be solved. a lot better.
I like that because there's nothing before that about these things. So it really is, you were, I'll call it a preview audience, like nowadays, seeing this movie. You might think you're getting a slasher movie. Do you know what I mean? Or something else.
Or a mystery movie, because how did this guy get up there and decide to stay there so long he got dehydrated? Did something dehydrate him quickly? You don't know at this point.
Well, that's why I liked it, because that's your first clue that something's not right. And then as the movie goes, you start getting more clues. Then they start finding missing people, dead people.
The setup is really what sets this thing apart from everything stereotypical about it. It does it different. It's unique.
Well, the original ending, I think, would have been a little more unique, too. The original ending actually had Val and Earl leaving town with Val's romantic feelings for Rhonda never really expressed until he reaches for a cigarette and realizes that Rhonda still has his lighter.
Hey, I think that woman still has our lighter.
Well, hell. That's a good lighter.
Turn us around, and that would have been the end. We never actually would have seen them kiss. Also, that would have paid off the cigarette gag that's going on throughout the whole movie, but apparently the preview audience objected when they were watching the movie. The audience was actually screaming, kiss her, in the scene right before it.
Or that you'd rather go back for your lighter than the girl.
Yeah. So they reshot
That's a very Bruce Willis kind of reaction.
Yeah. So they reshot it to have the kiss, and I kind of wish they had kept the original ending. I think that would have been a little more interesting. Okay, what's everybody's favorite scene from the movie?
It took me a while to pick one because I love the whole damn movie, but I think my favorite is probably the gun scene when they're in Bert and Heather's basement, and they're just shooting anything they can get off that wall.
Magazine!
Yeah! Broke into the wrong goddamn rec room, didn't you, you bastard?
My favorite scene is the opening scene. We've got Valentine peeing off a cliff, which I've heard so many people who live near canyons do. And it still terrifies me, the idea of flying off into, with wind gusts.
It's just pee.
Just peeing into the wind.
I could just imagine being at the bottom of the Grand Canyon and
yes. But, and scaring Earl into thinking there's going to be a stampede, and just the play they have off of each other, it sets us up to know that these characters have genuine emotion for each other, but they're goofy.
Stampede! Stampede, Earl! Get out the way! Get out the way!
You dumb shit. I was in a stampede once. 300 head going hell-bent for the horizon.
Now, exactly how many cows are required for a stampede, Earl? I mean, is it like 3 or more? Is there a minimum speed?
I wish I stampede up your ass.
It also sets up the ending because it's the exact spot where the ending occurs, where he does the stampede off the cliff. Chris?
So the scene of mine that's my favorite actually comes as kind of a silly scene, but I spoke earlier, of really liking all of the setup and really liking kind of the geography of the action sequences of this, the fact that they establish what these things do, how they get you. I really, really like the scene in Chang's Market when the Pepsi machine is on.
Turn it off! Pull it back! Pull it back! I got it.
I know it's a simple, little, subtle thing, but I like it. All of these things, we're trying our asses off to be as quiet as we can control, and a damn piece of technology ends up screwing us.
Which reminds me of the scene in Shaun of the Dead with the jukebox.
Yes.
Oh, yep.
Yes.
I also never appreciated the brilliant pacing of that. We've just come off of a big graboid attack, and there's this quiet moment, and we think we're going to have a long scene of dialogue, and it's suddenly cut off by that machine, and then boom, no, we're right into another attack.
And there's that one, and I love the wooden planks on the store when the graboid is coming in, popping up in the air like waves in an ocean with like a shark coming at you. I know that there's really no physical way that could actually happen like that without the ground caving in under it, but they sell it. They sell every single moment like that in this movie, and just the inventiveness shines through.
I think for me it might be the scene where Val and Earl quite accidentally lead it into the culvert and kill it.
We can make it! We can make it!
Stupid son of a bitch. Knocked itself cold.
Called my ass. He's dead.
I just love the pacing of that where they're running and it's like, we can make it, we can make it.
And they don't.
No, they don't make it.
They're going to get eaten.
And they managed to kill this thing by sheer dumb luck, which to me just sums up those characters beautifully.
And to speak to that, and I was hoping someone else was going to mention it because I just wrote it down. In their truck, the fuzzy dice has a shamrock on it and says "Lucky." And I thought that kind of played to their strengths, shall we say?
All right, what's everybody's recommendations? If somebody liked this movie, what other ones do you think they'd like?
I've mentioned it a few times, but I'm going to go with Grabbers.
Which is fantastic.
Really
it is. It's so great. And Slither. Both monsters from who knows where. One, I think in Slither you do know, with a humor to it. So it's kind of the natural successor to the Tremors vein.
Chris?
We had talked about it at the start, but Arachnophobia, like you said, it was out the same weekend. I just, they're the exact same kind of thing. Arachnophobia, I think, might still win out with having more things that are just sheer terrifying.
Oh, listening to audiences with that, their screams are amazing.
Because the movie's hilarious, but the spiders are horrific. The movie isn't the greatest movie in the world, but it kind of does this shame shtick. Was Eight-Legged Freaks.
I was thinking of that one too.
I dig the hell out of it. And I'm going to recommend a book. The characters of Earl and Val, and this is a trope that happens in a lot of things, but the book Under the Dome, and I won't say the terrible, terrible TV show, but the book, it starts up pretty much the same way. A guy came to this town, closing up shop and getting out of here, and the damn MacGuffin, the damn stupid thing that stops him from leaving happens to be a goddamn dome that keeps him there. But it's kind of the same build-up and chain of events. So that's my stuff.
Sorry?
I have a bunch, and mine are kind of more going to the silly aspect of the movie, but like Ghostbusters, Goonies, Jaws, Gremlins, the Indiana Jones movies, the Jurassic Park movies. Super 8's the one with the kids filming the thing with the train.
Super 8.
And the one with Barbara in the cemetery.
Night of the Living Dead?
Oh, yeah. Night of the Living Dead.
Is that it? They were coming to get you, Barbara?
Yeah. Yep.
And that one just popped into my head. You were saying...
One that always comes to mind when I'm watching this is The Host, where again you have this group of weird, quirky characters who end up having to come together to fight this crazy monster.
I had forgotten about
that
The Host.
weird thing where it could almost be a goofy family comedy and part of it feels like a horror movie and you just jam the two together. The other ones that come to mind are Evolution, the Ivan Reitman movie, which is kind of the same thing where a bunch of odd characters fighting all sorts of weird monsters. And I'd also throw in one of the movies that seemed to be an inspiration, Them, one of the great 1950s creature movies where, again, a small desert town being affected by nasty monsters. And there you have the original archetypes of the stoic scientists and the cop who are fighting them.
I love them.
Alrighty, well, that ends our conversation, but not the discussion. If you'd like to have your say about Tremors or feel that we missed something, check out the comment section for this episode on CinemaSpection.com and start talking. Email your comments, complaints, questions, and suggestions to cinemaspection@gmail.com. You can also like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter. Our show is available on iTunes and Stitcher, so if you like what you hear, please subscribe to us, and if you have a moment to spare, please leave us a review. We appreciate any feedback you can offer, and your reviews help improve our visibility. We'll be back to discuss another movie next time. Until then, remember to keep watching closely. There's more to a movie than just what's on the screen. Of course, McIntyre is best known as a spectacularly successful...
Spectacularly sexy.
All right, well, maybe that too.
That too.